Picture the line of lanterns moving across the dunes after sunset. Then the guides see a halo on the horizon. Not a campfire, not the moon. Something steady, something bigger. A faint shimmer like starlight on water, except there's no water for 100 miles. They walk toward it, and the glow doesn't fade. It sharpens. They reach a ridge and look down. There it is. Towers like white spears in the dark, a ring of walls, and streets that look lit from within. The place seems impossible this deep in sand, far from any river. But the gates are open and the guards are relaxed, and the market is still awake long after midnight. People called it many names. The poet said Iram of the Pillars. Traders said Uber. Others called it the City of Light. Whatever the name, the first rule was simple. You didn't stumble onto Iram by accident. The desert decided who found it. What made it glow? Everyone had a theory. Some swore the towers were faced with polished stone that held daylight and gave it back after dusk. Others said lamps burned on every roof with oil that never smoked and never went out, drawn from a sweet well that tasted like earth and metal. A few travelers talked about the ground itself, grainy and glassy in patches, as if lightning had fused the sand. They said when a wind passed over that glass, the city flickered. Most people didn't argue. They just stood and watched the walls shine while the sky went black. By day, it looked ordinary, busy, rich, loud. By night, it looked touched by something else. The city sat where trade routes crossed like threads. North to the ports, west to the valleys, south to the incense groves. It grew not because of kings, but because of timing. Caravans needed water and safety. Iram had wells. It had storage rooms cut cool below the streets. It had a watch that didn't sleep. And it had a rule. Everyone paid. No one fought in the market. And if trouble started, the gates closed fast. The rulers were merchants first, nobles second. They wore simple cloth when they bargained, and gold when they celebrated. They didn't care about thrones. They cared about ledgers. But money turns to pride, and pride wants more. Over time, the pillars rose higher. The gates grew heavier. The lamps burned brighter. They wanted every caravan on every route to see that glow and think, that is the safest city in the desert, and that is where the wealth goes. People came for work and stayed for the night air. Bakers ran ovens till dawn for travelers who preferred to walk after sunset. Scribes kept records in a dry hall where nothing ever spoiled. The well-master kept a tight count of every bucket. Children raced across roofs lit by low lamps. No smoke, no ash, just a soft, even light like dawn stuck between houses. Visitors kept asking the same question. How does this city live out here? No river, no oasis large enough to feed a place this size, no hills to catch rain. The locals smiled and pointed down. The desert, they said, keeps secrets under our feet. Some of those secrets were practical. Brine crusts in the earth that could be scraped and traded. Shallow seams of bitumen that burned hot and clean. A layer of stone bright as bone, sanded smooth by wind, set into the faces of towers so the whole city reflected the moon. Maybe that was all there was to it. Good engineering. Smart storage. A habit of lighting roofs so strangers could see the city from a day's march away. But the travelers still told it like a miracle, because miracles are easier to remember than construction methods. They said the city borrowed its light from the stars. They said the pillars were hollow and lined with something that shined. They said a prophet once warned the rulers not to build so high, and that the glow was a sign, not a blessing. Stories grew like weeds in sand. They always do. There was a sign at the main gate painted, not carved. It showed a hand open to the road. Under it, 4 short lines. Water is counted, words are weighed, weapons sleep, trade is welcome. Simple rules kept the city alive. For a while, that was enough. One summer, the glow changed. People noticed it first on the eastern walls. The light was stronger, whiter, like fire seen through salt. Children pressed their palms to the stone and pulled them back fast, laughing. The walls felt warm, even after midnight. The wellmaster shrugged. "Stone holds heat," he said. "It's the wind," but some of the older guards watched longer than usual. They had walked enough deserts to know when something didn't fit. Merchants started arriving later in the night, timing their march to the glow. They said it helped them find the city in sandstorms. They said it kept animals calm. They said light meant order. They spent freely. The city grew richer. Pride followed. The rulers raised a new set of pillars on the south side, higher than any before. Builders hauled bright stone by sled and laid it in thin sheets. When they finished, the south gate looked like a second moon when the lamps were lit. People bragged you could read a ledger in its reflection. A longtime scribe checked and said it was true. In the market, a traveler from the coast tried to sell a small shard of melted sand he claimed to have found a day's march away. It was smooth and greenish, like bottle glass, but heavier. He said the desert did that lightning or worse. Nobody believed him until a temple mason bought it and set it into a doorway. The shard held sunlight till midnight and then dimmed. A new rumor started. The city mined light. Maybe that was when the balance tipped. When a city that had survived on quiet good sense started to think it was chosen. The change showed up in little things at first. Inspectors adding an extra fee at the gate because the lamps cost oil. Clerks taxing the same caravan. Twice entry and exit because the glow protects both ways. Guards checking loads with more interest than usual. Nothing big. Nothing you could point at and say, "This is new." Just a weight that wasn't there before. At the main well, the counter stones the flat markers used to track water drawn ran out more often. The wellmaster asked for patience. The rulers asked for more lamps lit on the walls. Bakers said flour came late because caravans paused longer to watch the city shine. Scribes wrote faster. Night felt busy all the time. Then came a month of hot winds. Sand moved like water. The glow looked brighter through the dust. People stayed on their roofs and watched the walls flicker. Children cheered each time a gust turned the city into a halo. The old guides stayed in the alleys and squinted up at the pillars like they were measuring something. One guide, the kind who kept his beard short and his mouth shut, started telling a quiet story to anyone who would listen. He said light brings travelers, and eventually it brings envy. He said a city that glows at night should be careful. It draws what it doesn't want as easily as what it does. Nobody wanted to hear that. There was money to count and rooms to let and new lamps to hang. Still, questions kept coming. What if the glow isn't a gift? What if it's a warning? What if the stone is warming because the ground is changing? What if the well that never failed has more sand in its buckets than it used to? What if light makes you forget to look at what's under your feet? One evening, a caravan arrived late and quiet. No bells, no jokes, no bargaining. Their leader carried a strip of cloth tied to a stick. On the cloth, a simple shape like a circle cracked down the middle. He said he had seen a sink open in the flats 2 days east. No warning, no swirl. Just a mouth in the earth swallowing a loaded camel in one breath. He said the ground sounded hollow before it happened, like wood when you knock it. The wellmaster listened. The rulers nodded. The lamps burned brighter that night than any night before. You could still walk the south wall and read an inventory in its shine. You could still sit in the market at midnight and see every face. You could still watch the glow pull every eye inside the gates. That was the point. The desert was wide. The desert was cruel. The glow said, "Here's a place that won't let you die." And that was true until it wasn't, because the desert has one rule more powerful than any city has laws. Everything that rises will one day lie down. Sand remembers. Wind keeps accounts. Pride writes checks the ground eventually cashes. No one knew it yet, but the city had already crossed a line. The light that drew safety was about to draw something else. The tricks that held water in a place with no river were about to fail. The merchants who built the glow would soon learn what happens when a city outshines the road that feeds it. For now, though, the lamps burned. The towers gleamed. The gate signs still promised water counted, words weighed, weapons sleeping, trade welcome. And across the dunes, beyond the reach of any guard's eye, the wind started a small ripple that would become a wave. At first, the signs looked harmless. A few cracks along the wells. Sand piling against doors faster than usual. People blamed the wind and moved on. But the desert keeps score. It watches. It waits. The glow grew brighter. It should have been good for business merchants could see the city from farther away, but the color changed. It wasn't the soft yellow of lamp oil anymore. It was pale, almost white, like lightning that refused to fade. When the moon was gone, the walls still gleamed. Children started waking at night, saying the ground hummed. The wellmaster sent for stonecutters to check the shafts. They found the walls warm, the water lower. The sand they pulled up was finer, like dust. One cutter lowered a lamp too far, and the flame went out. Not from wind, there was no air. Just pressure, like the earth itself holding its breath. Rumors spread fast. Some said fire demons lived under the city, and the glow was their warning. Others said the rulers had trapped light beneath the towers, and it wanted out. The rulers laughed. They ordered more lamps lit, more festivals, more trade. A city that glowed at night couldn't die in daylight, they said. Then the caravans stopped coming. First the northern route went quiet, then the southern one. Scouts returned saying dunes had shifted, whole trails gone, markers buried. The wind no longer followed its old paths. Every storm came from the east now, straight toward Iram. People began leaving after sunset, traveling without lamps. The rulers called them cowards and sealed the gates. Inside, the glow burned harder. The air tasted of salt and heat. Wells boiled at noon, cooled at dusk, and steamed again by dawn. The sand near the walls turned glassy. One night, the ground moved. Not a quake, just a long, slow pulse that rattled jars and made water tremble in bowls. The next morning, a crack ran through the market square from gate to well. It was thin as a thread, but straight as a sword. The masons filled it with pitch. The next day it opened again, wider. The rulers gathered the merchants. "We'll dig deeper," they said. "There's more water below." But the wellmaster refused. "There's nothing under us but hollow stone," he said. "We built too heavy." They dismissed him, called him frightened by shadows. He packed a single jug and left through the north gate. By midsummer, the glow was unbearable. Birds avoided the city. Camels sweated and refused to kneel. The sand around the walls felt soft, like flour. And every night the wind came steady and rising. The final storm didn't look like a storm. It started with silence. No wind, no insects, no distant caravan bells. The sky dimmed without clouds. Then the air itself seemed to lean. Dust lifted from the ground, as if drawn upward. The first gust came from nowhere, hot, sharp, dry. Lamps went out. A second gust followed, harder, carrying sand that cut skin. Then the roar began. People ran to seal windows, to tie doors, to save ledgers. The towers swayed. The south gate slammed shut on its own hinges. The glow flared white so bright it erased shadow and then vanished, swallowed by a wall of dust. Inside the storm, no one saw the city fall. They only heard the pillars crack one after another, like trees splitting in fire. Roofs slid. Wells burst upward. Streets filled with sand that moved like water. The desert didn't bury Iram slowly. It folded over it like a closing hand. When morning came, the wind stopped. The horizon was smooth again. No towers, no walls. Just a shimmer of heat and a faint crust of glass where the city had stood. Days later, a few survivors crawled out of dunes miles away. Their eyes were swollen from sand. They said the glow was still there under the surface, soft, pulsing, like embers through ash. Travelers avoided the area for generations. At night, when the air was clear, some claimed they could see a low light through the dunes, as if the city were still burning beneath. Guides warned each other never to chase it. "That's not a campfire," they'd say. "That's Iram breathing." Centuries passed. The road shifted. The legend stayed. The city that glowed at night had vanished, but its light refused to die. After Iram vanished, the desert closed its mouth and pretended nothing had ever been there. The dunes smoothed over like skin healing from a wound. The wind erased every road that once led to its gates. But people remember what the desert forgets. For centuries, travelers still spoke of a light that flickered far out on the horizon, never steady, never close, just enough to make someone wonder. Guides said it was a trick of heat or stars. Older men said it wasn't a trick at all. They called it the ghost of Iram. The Bedouins told stories around small fires, their faces glowing orange against the dark. The stories changed with every retelling, but one detail always stayed the same. The city glowed from within, as if the sand itself had trapped its light. Some said it was cursed, a punishment from heaven for greed. Others said it was blessed, taken to protect it from invaders. And a few whispered something stranger, that the glow was still alive. That under the dunes, deep below the desert floor, there was still a heartbeat. Caravans avoided that stretch of desert for generations. The sand there was said to hum when the wind rose, to shine faintly under a new moon. Anyone who tried to cross it came back with stories. Soft ground that rippled underfoot, strange glassy stones, shapes half buried that looked like carved pillars. No one ever found a full wall or single inscription. Nothing solid enough to prove the city had existed. That made the legend stronger. The less evidence, the bigger the mystery. Poets kept it alive. They wrote of a city of lamps that defied night. Sufi mystics turned it into a parable. The soul that glows too brightly consumes itself. Traders turned it into a warning. Never trust anything that shines too long in the desert. But even as the story faded into myth, the name Iram of the Pillars lingered in old texts, carved in stone tablets, written in Quranic verses, mentioned in passing by historians who never agreed where it stood. Then the world changed. Centuries rolled by. Caravans gave way to explorers with compasses and notebooks. Maps filled in blank spaces where once only stories lived. The empty quarter, a sea of dunes larger than many countries, became a target for curiosity. And every explorer heard the same rumor. Somewhere out there was a city swallowed by sand, still glowing under the surface. In the early 20th century, desert explorers began chasing it in earnest. The British called it the Atlantis of the Sands. They thought they could find it with camels, cameras, and luck. A few vanished trying. One expedition in the 1930s claimed they found pillars poking out of a dune, but when they returned a week later, the wind had covered everything. No photos, no proof. Just one shaken man saying, "At night, the ground glowed." Then came World War II, and the desert fell quiet again. Planes crossed it. Armies skirted its edges. But the heart of it, that deep, shifting wilderness, remained untouched. When the war ended, technology caught up with curiosity. Satellites began scanning the Earth from above. Scientists used radar to map the shape of dunes, looking for buried riverbeds, old trade routes, ancient walls. And somewhere in those blurred, sandy images, they saw something. Faint lines forming circles and straight paths where there should have been none. They traced the lines to a point. In the middle of nowhere, where no city should exist, was a pattern that looked like streets radiating from a center. The coordinates matched the region old Arabic texts had described. And the researchers realized something shocking. Those ancient legends might not be legends at all. Excavations began in the 1990s. They didn't find glowing towers or golden walls, just fragments. Stone blocks smoothed by sand, broken pottery, bits of metal fused together as if by fire. But what caught everyone's attention was the glass. The sand around the site was littered with chunks of greenish, melted glass, the kind that forms when lightning strikes or when something burns hotter than any campfire could. It was as if the entire city had been flash-heated from below, frozen mid-collapse. The scientists had a word for it: silica melt. They'd seen it before, in deserts hit by meteor impacts. So maybe the glow wasn't magic or divine punishment. Maybe it was geology, or something bigger. Maybe a meteor had struck near the city, turning sand to glass and shaking the wells dry. Maybe the people saw the glow not from their lamps, but from the desert itself on fire. But here's what didn't fit. The amount of glass was too small for a full meteor strike, too large for ordinary lightning. It was concentrated, as if something underground had released a wave of heat that rolled upward and stopped just as suddenly. The more they dug, the stranger it got. Somewhere in the lowest layer, buried deeper than any ruin should be, they found what looked like fused stone shaped into near-perfect cylinders. Not carved, not laid by hand, melted. And on a few of those cylinders, faint grooves, almost like writing, but no one could read them. The expedition went public. Headlines called it the Lost City of Iram Found. Newspapers printed photos of the site. Broken columns, scorched sand, the outline of walls half visible from above. The world loved the story. A city that glowed at night. A civilization swallowed by sand. Science confirming myth. But locals were less excited. Bedouins nearby warned the scientists to leave it alone. They said the glow wasn't gone, only buried. They said the city's fall wasn't natural. One elder put it simply: the ground remembers fire. You dig deep enough, you wake it again. The researchers laughed, politely. But they didn't stay long after that. A week later, a sandstorm hit the site without warning. Half the camp was buried. The equipment failed. When they returned months later, the spot had shifted again. The dunes had erased their trenches. The desert had reclaimed Iram once more. By the time the 21st century arrived, the legend of the glowing city wasn't just a campfire story anymore. It was a target on every archaeologist's map. Iram of the Pillars. The City of Light. The Atlantis of the Sands. The names changed, but the mystery stayed the same. A city that had no business existing in a place that kills anything that lingers too long. Everyone wanted to be the one who proved it. Satellite imagery had given researchers a taste. Faint lines, symmetrical mounds, trails that looked suspiciously like ancient roads radiating from a central hub. But the desert doesn't give up its secrets easily. Each year, the sand shifts by meters. A site uncovered one month can vanish by the next. Still, technology kept improving. Radar could now scan beneath the surface, and drones could map terrain too dangerous for people. Teams from Oman, Saudi Arabia, and the U.S. pooled resources, following the old coordinates from the earlier expedition. And beneath the dunes, something strange began to take shape. A cluster of long, linear shadows buried under 50 meters of sand. They called the site Structure 47. At first, everyone expected typical ruins, walls, columns, pottery. Instead, what they found was geometry. Perfect geometry. The lines formed a circle nearly a kilometer wide, divided evenly like a wheel. And in the center, a depression, shallow, symmetrical, and oddly reflective. That was where they began to dig. At 12 meters down, they found what looked like pavement, a layer of stone fused together, smooth as glass. It wasn't carved, it wasn't laid. It was melted, like the floor of a furnace that had cooled in place. Under the floodlights, it caught and bounced light in every direction. The workers joked that the city had started glowing again. Nobody laughed after the first night. The temperature around the dig site climbed 10 degrees higher than the surrounding desert, even after sunset. Cameras fogged from heat shimmer. The air felt thick, not like fire, but like static. Some of the crew said they heard faint vibrations, a low hum, like wind through a metal pipe. The generators were checked. Everything was normal. The next day, they uncovered fragments of columns, each sheared clean through, as if something had sliced them at an angle. The cuts were smooth, too smooth. Whatever destroyed Iram hadn't just buried it. It had reshaped it. The team lead, a woman named Dr. Hassan, called in specialists from Muscat to test samples. The lab results came back 2 weeks later. The rock had been exposed to temperatures over 3,000 degrees Celsius. That's hotter than any known fire, hotter than most volcanic eruptions. There was no crater, no evidence of an impact. The heat had come from below. When the report circulated, one line stood out: localized subsurface vitrification consistent with massive electrical discharge or unknown geothermal event. In simple terms, something had melted the city from the inside out. Dr. Hassan didn't believe in curses, but she couldn't ignore what kept happening. The dig's electronics started failing one by one. Radios, sensors, GPS. Then, 3 nights in a row, the satellite link went down exactly at midnight. The crew said the ground glowed faintly during those hours, a dim light that rippled through the sand like heat waves. When she asked for proof, one worker showed her a photo, a long exposure shot of the central pit. Across the frame, faint streaks of light arced upward, like sparks frozen midair. "Dust and static," she said, but her voice didn't sound certain. Then, as quickly as it began, everything stopped. The air cooled. The lights stopped flickering. The hum vanished. They packed up, left motion sensors buried in the sand, and promised to return once conditions stabilized. 2 months later, the motion sensors started transmitting again, but not movement, light. Every night for 6 minutes, just before midnight, the instruments registered a flash below the surface, invisible to the naked eye, but clear on sensors. A pulse, then silence again. Word spread fast. Documentaries called it the desert that breathes. Scientists proposed a dozen theories: trapped gas igniting, buried quartz discharging static, bioluminescent bacteria, even secret military tests. None explained the pattern. None explained the geometry. None explained the melted stone. Local tribes began warning them again. Stop digging. They said the glow was the city's heartbeat, and that when it faded centuries ago, it was only sleeping. But one evening, she walked the ridge alone as the sun set and saw it for herself. Far out across the dunes, the sand shimmered, not from heat or movement, but from light. Faint, steady, rising and falling like breath. She stood there until it vanished. When she returned to camp, she didn't log the sighting. She didn't need to. The next morning, the glass floor at the center pit had cracked. No wind, no tremor. Just one clean fracture down the middle, straight through the spot where the light readings were strongest. The crew decided to pause the excavation indefinitely. They buried the equipment, sealed the site, and covered it with sand again, like everyone before them. The official report cited unstable terrain. The unofficial story spread faster. The city had started glowing again.